I'm going to introduce you in French. Donc Magdalena Grüner étudie les liens entre l'art et l'océanographie au XIXe siècle et au début du XXe siècle. On l'a invitée pour qu'elle nous parle en fait brièvement de son projet de thèse qui s'intitule « Vision abyssale, la science-fiction des expéditions océaniques des Bermudes », parce que c'était important pour nous de voir est-ce que cet imaginaire de la découverte, et notamment de la découverte océanographique, pouvait en fait apporter quelque chose dans le contexte de cet apprentissage de l'inconnu et de manière un peu renouvelée dans le champ de l'histoire de l'art et de la théorie de l'art. Thank you, Magdalena, for being with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much for this introduction, which I didn't understand, but I'm sure you only said very good things. Good. Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to start. Among the holdings of the Wildlife Conservation Society archives in New York is a lantern slide that shows a picture of the night sky. Gleaming celestial bodies open a view into incomprehensible distances and light years into the past. The luminous spots of various shapes and intensities evoke a sense of familiarity and alienation, of attraction and unease, of fascination and dread. Outer space, the infinite, unreachable other that is always in our company, whether in or out of sight. Curiously, this object is stored in an envelope labeled expéditions, bathysphere, fish, bioluminescent flesh in the deep, dark sea. From the vast expanses of the universe, we plunge into the abyssal depths of the ocean. The so-called bathysphere was the device that carried human bodies into the deep sea for the very first time during the years of 1930 through 1934. The descents were part of the Bermuda oceanographic expeditions conducted by a group of scientists and artists, the Department of Tropical Research of the New York Zoological Society. By definition, the deep sea is an environment characterized by darkness. It begins wherever the last traces of daylight are absorbed by the watery masses. In the absence of light, the conflation of seeing and knowing remains suspended, and the scientific pursuit of enlightenment is set adrift. Unimpressed by the deep sea's obstruction of vision, the Department of Tropical Research obsessively produced a plethora of pictures determined to confer some sort of visibility upon this most opaque of environments. The oceanic celestial glass slide found its way into the archive because William Beebe, the director of the Department of Tropical Research, used it in his public lectures. It also appeared in his 1934 account of the dives titled Half Mile Down. But this image is in fact not a photograph of the deep sea. It is indeed a photograph of outer space, produced at the Mount Wilson Observatory at the Carnegie Institution in Pasadena, California. In the book, it appears alongside a nearly entirely black rectangle. A photograph of the sea at great depths shows only complete blackness, the caption explains, with a scattering of sparks and lights from bodies of fish and other organisms. While visually uninformative, this black surface, scattered with a few white dots and smudges, can be considered the first published photograph of the deep sea. A glass slide of this picture, however, is nowhere to be found. Presumably, at some point, the photograph of outer space slipped into its place. This anecdote from the archives proves to be intriguingly productive, as it encapsulates what the members of the Department of Tropical Research would experience firsthand on their deep-sea ventures. In the ocean, where our senses falter and reason ceases to be the paramount tool for accessing the world, imagination, fantasy, and dreams unfold their epistemic potential. As we're faced with this empty picture, we realize that any investigation of the deep sea is, at its core, an epistemological exercise. This symposium is dedicated to the unknown in its many forms, as uncertainty, ambiguity, or sheer ignorance, as speculation, wonder, or serendipity. The visual objects produced on the Bermuda oceanographic expeditions, however, invite the consideration of the unknown as an epistemic dilemma, a paradoxical configuration, both obstructive and generative. Earlier deep-sea research relied primarily on remote collecting techniques. research vessels lowered fishing lines and trawling nets into the ocean at various depths, hauling specimens back to the surface along their travel routes. It was the method of the Travailleur and Talisman voyages in the early 1880s, which found, described, and named numerous new species, forming a vast collection that is today at the Musée Océanographique in Monaco, not too far from here. About half a century later, and across the Atlantic, the Department of Tropical Research adopted a different approach. Rather than collecting alongside a route, it established an experimental research station on Bermuda's evocatively named Nonsuch Island. The group focused its effort within an area 13 kilometers off the coast and at a depth from 800 to 1,600 meters. This reflects the Bermuda Oceanographic Expedition's distinctly place-based approach to deep-sea exploration, geared towards investigating the ocean's environmental fabric from within. The bathysphere descents were part of this commitment. Unlike nets, a technology inherently remote, the bathysphere allowed researchers to explore the deep sea in situ. During the dives, Beebe observed species through the portholes that never had been captured in nets, and he was eager to classify them as new taxa, but faced with a fundamental obstacle. The bathysphere was an observational device and not designed for collecting. But according to taxonomic standards, a new species can only be formally recognized if a physical specimen is collected, prepared, and deposited in a natural history collection. For context, this is the purpose of specimen collections. They tie the name of an organism to the organism in question. So this is how we store the knowledge of how we refer to animals, plants, fungi, minerals, etc. For every single thing that has been taxonomically cataloged somewhere in the world, in the depths of a natural history collection, there's at least one corresponding prepared specimen. Lacking specimens, the Department of Tropical Research pursued an alternative path. And I quote, "Soon after returning to the surface," Beebe recalls, "I reviewed my telephone notes." Oh, here, I have to quote, yeah. "I reviewed my telephone notes. Then, with my artist, Mrs. Boselman, I went into an artistic huddle, made scrawling attempts myself, and then carefully corrected her trained drawings. Little by little, my brainfish materialized, their proportions, size, color, lights, fins interdigitated with those of my memory." Unquote. Observation and picturing were distributed across bodies and technologies. Beebe observed organisms through the bathysphere window, described them via telephone to his colleague Gloria Hollister on deck, who took meticulous notes. And ultimately, these notes, supplemented by Beebe's recollections, guided Else Boselman's paintings. Proximity was achieved not by extracting the animals from their habitat, but through a literal game of telephone, a chain of media transformations that produced pictures intended to serve as stand-ins for type specimens. The most prominent example of this practice was Bathysphera intacta, or the untouchable bathysphere fish, seen at a depth of about 640 meters. In Boselman's painting, Giants of the Deep Greet the Bathysphere, two fish circle the diving device suspended from above in dynamic motion. One glides past the portholes where a human face peers out in uneasy astonishment. The other, partially hidden in the dark, twists around the cables. Lit by the bathysphere's searchlight, the creatures exhibit bioluminescent tentacles, massive jaws, and a glowing row of photophores alongside their bodies. A second rendering by fellow expedition artist Helen Damrosch-Tevan similarly resists the convention of taxonomic illustration by incorporating the bathysphere and thus introducing a spatial dimension into suggestive of a habitat. Both pictures navigate the tension between serving a taxonomic function and conveying environmental embeddedness. Rather than presenting the animals in isolation and invoking neutrality and objectivity, the artists situated them within their deep sea surroundings, whether by responding to the visual logic of the deep sea through the use of black paper or by linking the fish to the bathysphere suspended in mid-ocean. Yet, despite this contextual grounding, the fish's bodies appear strangely immobilized, suspended in the dark, awkwardly stiff, as if caught in between a scientific record and aesthetic tableau. Bibi's new species was never accepted by the scientific community. There is, however, potential in seeing the consequences of this failure through. Scholars of the history of ocean science have pointed out that the sciences feature a terrestrial bias. Practices, tools, methodologies, theoretical frameworks have been developed through, on, and for humans' natural environment, namely on land. Submerging these activities in seawater does not remain without consequences. Categories slip, methods falter, practices fail. The Department of Tropical Research's attempt to describe a species and name it through observation compels us to think critically about existing taxonomic practices. What does it say about the scientific epistemology we subscribe to if it insists that to know a species, we must first kill at least one representative of it? This shows us that indeed the version of the scientific we have been operating with equates knowledge with domination, without minimizing the accomplishments of materialist science or dismiss taxonomic practices, which I really am not doing. We can let Bostelman and Bibi's collaboration inspire us to reevaluate our ways of knowing the world, and perhaps we can work playfully with the unknown to imagine a scientific epistemology that is grounded not in mastery, but in encounter. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Magdalena. Do we have any questions? Maybe one here.
Great talk, Magdalena. I was wondering about the size of the fish. They appear really, really large when compared to the device they used to go in the bottom. So I was wondering whether there was a kind of specification in the legend of the figure or something like this.
Yes, it says 6 feet. It was 6 feet long, which is one of the reasons why Bibi argued we have to find like practices that allow us to describe new species from observation, because this size of fish, according to him, cannot be caught in nets, because nets are too slow, too small, like too fragile. They could never catch a fish that is big like this. So, I mean, we don't know whether it actually exists or whatever it was he saw. But that is the size of it is one of the reasons why, he wanted to actually make this strong argument for alternative knowledge practices for the deep sea. Thanks.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions qui peuvent être en français aussi, hein, n'hésitez pas, on traduira.
Maybe just one question. You speak of science fiction, so I was wondering, how do you use that? Because also you have the slash between science and fictions. How do you use that? Here you gave us a very thought-provoking example, because the failure of integrating certain epistemologies is clear, but oftentimes we are also in gray zones, both the side of science and also in the side of representation. So I was wondering if science fiction is useful in that sense, and how do you use it as a tool, I would say, in your research?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I wanted to, with this term, I basically wanted to mark that, the line between science and fiction is a malleable one. It's maybe a semi-permeable membrane that is between the two, and so we use, in order to be inventive and find new ways of knowing a place that evades the epistemologies we usually operate on. We definitely that is the one place where it gets very obvious how even scientific, how these two spheres that we sometimes consider to be separate are like really very closely interconnected, and so that's why I use this term.
Il y a une question là-bas.
Thanks, Magdalena. Great stuff. Did you follow up on this kind of research and try to identify, or did this fish, which we saw on the drawing, has been identified, like in this traditional sense of no?
No, nothing that would like be similar has been seen. There are different theories of what it could have been, but I mean, it was actually not the only species that he tried to establish this way. Is my presentation still here? Because oh, okay. I brought a slide. These are like the three on the left. These are the other three that he tried to establish, and there are different theories. For example, the third one, the pallid sailfin, people have speculated that perhaps he might have seen like a squid, a giant squid. Or the first one could be like one of these jellyfish that, you know, produce like very iridescent light effects when you shine light on them. But no, it hasn't. Like nothing has been captured that would have been considered the untouchable bathysphere fish or any of these actually. But it doesn't mean they don't exist. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sorry, there is one last question that will be really quick, maybe.
Oui. Thank you.
Qui révèle la tension entre exploration spatiale et exploration abyssale de notre rapport à l'inconnu. Parce que vous nous avez... en anglais? Okay. I would like to ask you, which is the lien, la relation, the connection between space exploration and the exploration of the oceans. En connexion, in connection to les sujets, to the subject of this symposium.
Okay, so the connection between ocean exploration and the exploration of outer space and the unknown. I mean, I think that one aspect of this that they have, that outer space and the ocean have in common, is that they are like places for all sorts of projection, just because they operate in so different ways than our environment we inhabit. So it's hard to even wrap our heads around what it would mean to actually be present in the deep sea, or what it would mean to inhabit outer space. And I think that in both cases, they function as some sort of, and like other theorists have called this like a disorientation device. So they can help us confuse our existing epistemologies and question them, and maybe produce something else or other approaches, because they are like, so they subvert basically what we are dealing with. And I think that is definitely something they have in common. And often they just become like basically one narrative space or one imaginative space, because they are maybe almost equally unreachable epistemically and physically. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about this interconnection.
Merci, Magdalena. Thank you so much for this presentation. It's beautiful. Beautiful to explore the depth of the sea and all the creativity that can be deployed in a non-intrusive manner somehow, and that's very important.